The night belonged to Daniel Cross. He wasn't just another man in a city of titans, he was the man. The kind of figure who could command a boardroom with a raised eyebrow or shift markets with a single offhand remark. His name alone carried weight, his net worth eclipsing the economy of entire towns across America. To the world, Daniel was untouchable. A sleek black sedan glided to a halt before the polished brass doors of the Golden Compass, Manhattan's crown jewel of fine dining. This wasn't merely a restaurant. It was a fortress of exclusivity. Reservations were whispered about in social circles, its booths occupied by power brokers, old money aristocrats, and celebrities hoping to stay just out of sight. To eat here was to belong to the upper echelon. Daniel emerged from the car like a conquering general returning from war. His tailored suit clung to his tall, lean frame with predatory precision. A platinum watch gleamed beneath his cuff, less a timepiece, more a trophy proof of victories won in battles of finance. His sharp jawline, perfectly combed dark hair, and cold blue eyes made him seem less human, more sculpture. He didn't walk into places like this. He consumed them. The doorman hurried to pull the door open. Inside, conversations faltered. A ripple of whispers followed him across the marble floor. Some eyes gleamed with admiration. And there goes Daniel Cross, the genius of Silicon Valley. Others betrayed discomfort. There was something about his presence that pressed on the air, as if the room itself bent beneath the weight of his ego. At the host stand stood Julien Moreau, the maître d'élégance and posture voice softened by years of refinement. He had dealt with senators, magnates, and actors drunk on their own fame. But even he felt the edge of unease when Daniel's piercing gaze fell upon him. "Good evening, Mr. Cross," Julien said smoothly. "Do you have a reservation?" Daniel's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. His eyes swept the room, dismissing table after table, until they landed on a coveted alcove by the grand window. A semi-private booth washed in soft golden light, where an elderly couple now sat holding hands, sharing wine, the glow of their anniversary reflected in their smiles. "I'll be taking that booth," Daniel said flatly, his tone leaving no space for discussion. Julien hesitated, though his smile never wavered. "I am very sorry, sir. That booth is occupied this evening. May I suggest the table near the fireplace? It is one of our finest." Daniel leaned in slightly, his voice dropping low, sharp enough to cut glass. "You misunderstand. I don't ask for tables. I tell you which one I want. That booth is mine." The air shifted. The restaurant grew quieter, forks stilled halfway, to mouth the hum of conversation falling into an uneasy silence. The old couple, realizing they were at the center of a storm, exchanged a glance, sad, dignified, unyielding. Julian's throat tightened, his polished manners teetering against the blunt force of Daniel's arrogance. And then, from the side, a new voice rose. Calm, steady, unshaken. A waitress with chestnut hair pulled into a neat bun stepped forward, her tray tucked under her arm, her eyes warm yet firm. Her name was Grace Miller. And in that breathless silence, she didn't just approach a demanding customer, she walked straight into her past. The past that Daniel Cross thought he had buried forever. Julien hesitated, his well-trained smile starting to fracture under the weight of Daniel Cross's icy demand. The silence of the restaurant pressed in like a heavy curtain, every diner leaning closer without daring to move. And that was when Grace Miller spoke. "Julien," she said gently, her voice carrying further than it should have in the hush, "I can handle this." Daniel turned toward her, his expression flickering with the faintest trace of annoyance. To him, she was just another server, another face in an endless parade of nameless staff he'd ordered around his whole life. But Grace's eyes, they didn't hold fear. They held recognition. She studied him closely, her heart pounding. The sharp jawline, the suit worth more than her year's rent, the dismissive sneer that was all new. But beneath it, the rhythm of his hand tapping against his thigh, impatient, almost twitching, and the faint scar above his left brow. She knew those things. A ghost rose in her memory, a grimy diner in Scranton, Pennsylvania. The hiss of fryers, the clatter of chipped plates, the stink of old grease that never washed out of uniforms. And a boy dark-haired, restless, angry at the world scrubbing pans until his hands bled. His name wasn't Daniel Cross back then. It was David Kowalski. Grace swallowed hard. She didn't strike all at once. She let the truth seep out in drops like cracks spreading across glass. "Funny," she said softly, her eyes never leaving his. "I remember someone with a scar just like that. Got it when he slipped by the ice machine, hit his head on the prep counter." Daniel's smirk faltered, just slightly. "And the way you tap your finger when you were impatient," she continued. "I used to see that every night right by the dish pit. Same rhythm, same boy." Whispers rippled through the restaurant. Diners leaned in, their curiosity sharpening. Daniel's face hardened, but the color drained from his cheeks. Grace took one step closer, lowering her voice, so the words carried only enough to reach him, and everyone else straining to hear. "You always said you'd change your name one day," she whispered. "Said you'd pick something that sounded like money." His pupils widened, panic flickering beneath the steel mask. And then she said it. The name he had buried, the one he'd spent fortunes to erase. David Kowalski. The words fell into the room, like a stone dropped into a still lake. The ripples were immediate gasps, forks clattering against plates, a frozen silence that felt louder than thunder. Daniel Cross, the Titan, the billionaire, the man the city feared and obeyed, stood exposed. Not as a mogul, but as a dishwasher from a Rust Belt diner. Grace's voice was steady, almost kind as she pressed the truth deeper. "You dreamed of escaping those greasy nights, of never being looked down on again. And now, here you are. But you're still that boy, David. You've just traded dishwater for silk." Daniel's mask slipped completely. His lips trembled, his breath sharp and shallow. The mighty Titan was gone. In his place stood the boy he could never outrun. For a long moment, Daniel Cross stood frozen, his jaw tight, his face drained of color. Then, like a cornered predator, he struck back. "This is absurd." He snapped, his voice rising, crashing against the silence like a clap of thunder. "I don't know this woman. She's clearly delusional." He jabbed a finger toward Grace, his veneer of charm replaced by raw hostility. "Julian. I want her fired. Immediately. If she's still employed when I leave this building, this restaurant will regret it." The maître de Julien Moreau swallowed hard. His polished calm cracked. The weight of Daniel's power pressed on him like a blade at his throat. The diners stirred uneasily, some with disgust at Daniel's cruelty, others with pity for the man unraveling before their eyes. At the far booth, the elderly couple rose quietly. Their anniversary dinner lay unfinished, their joy soured by a billionaire's tantrum. The old man's gaze lingered on Daniel for just a heartbeat, steady, disappointed, cutting deeper than words. They left hand in hand, dignity intact, while the so-called Titan raged behind them. "Fired!" Daniel roared again, his voice echoing across glass and silver. "Do you hear me, Julian? She's finished." But Grace did not flinch. She didn't shrink. She stood straighter, her hands steady, her voice even almost gentle, yet every word a hammer striking his fragile armor. "Delusional," she said quietly. "I remember the night you slipped on a wet patch by the ice machine. You hit your head on the prep counter so hard I thought you'd cracked your skull. That scar over your brow, I was there." Daniel's breath caught. His hand instinctively twitched toward the scar, as though to hide it. "And that tattoo." Grace pressed her eyes, steadier tone, still calm. "The eagle on your shoulder. You got it on a dare, and it looked so bad you laughed at yourself for weeks. Who else would know that but me, David? Gasps rippled through the dining room. Diners leaned in spellbound. Daniel's fury shook the air, but so too did his fear. His hands trembled at his sides, betraying him. Across the room, Olivia Hart, her notebook already filled with weeks of interviews and polished quotes, wrote like a woman possessed. Her eyes gleamed with a fire Daniel did not yet see. She had come to capture a titan's triumph. Instead, she was chronicling the unmasking of a man who had tried to bury himself. Grace's voice softened, but the weight of her words pressed harder than ever. You swore you'd bury David Kowalski one day. You said you'd make a new name for yourself, a name that sounded like money. And here you are. But no matter how far you've run, I still see him. And so does everyone else now. The room was electric, hushed, breathless. The empire Daniel had built wasn't crumbling in a boardroom or in the stock market. It was collapsing in front of an audience of strangers, shattered by truths no wealth could silence. High above the hushed dining room, in a private office paneled with dark mahogany, Arthur Finch sat behind his desk when the phone rang. The voice on the other end came fast, sharp, and trembling with fury. Finch Daniel barked his words, nearly hissing through clenched teeth. I was just humiliated in your establishment. You have a waitress, Grace Miller. Fire her. Tonight. Or I'll make sure your business is reduced to rubble. I'll buy the block you sit on and bulldoze your little empire into a parking lot. Arthur let the storm wash over him without interruption. His expression did not change. He had heard threats before, but rarely one delivered with such naked desperation. His gaze drifted to an old framed photo on his desk, his first job washing dishes in a Queen's diner sleeves, rolled up grease on his hands, a tired smile on his young wife's face beside him. When Daniel finally spat out his last venomous word, Arthur's reply was calm, almost soft. Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Mr. Cross. I'll handle it personally. He set the phone down with deliberate care, the decision already forming in his mind. Moments later, Grace was summoned upstairs. Her steps were heavy, her heart sinking. She braced for the words she was certain were coming, that her outburst had cost her everything. Tuition, rent, the fragile stability she'd been fighting to hold together. She entered the office, hands clasped tightly before her. Mr. Finch, she began quickly. I'm sorry if I caused a scene. Arthur raised a hand, silencing her. Sit. His voice carried no anger, only the weight of a man measuring truth. Tell me what happened. Your version. Grace hesitated, then drew a steadying breath. She recounted everything. Daniel's arrogance at the door, his bullying of the elderly couple. The memory that had struck her like lightning, the boy she'd known in Scranton, now hidden behind a billionaire's mask. She spoke plainly without dramatics, her voice steady as if each word were a brick laid in a wall of truth. Arthur listened without interruption. When she finished, the silence stretched his eyes, studying her with an intensity that made her chest tighten. Finally, he leaned back, fingers steepled. Do you know my first job, Grace? Washing dishes. Silver spoon, diner queens. Hardest work I ever did. Humbling work. Work that teaches you who you are when no one is watching. Her eyes widened, slightly startled. You, Arthur continued, did not harm this restaurant tonight. You protected its soul. You showed courage when it mattered. That is worth more than 100 billionaires strutting through my doors. Grace blinked, struggling to process his words. So, I'm not fired. Arthur's mouth curved into the smallest, warmest smile. Fired, no. Promoted. As of tomorrow, you'll serve as assistant manager. Julian needs the help. And one more thing, I'll be covering your tuition. Consider it an investment. Integrity like yours deserves a future. Tears welled in Grace's eyes, spilling before she could stop them. The weight she'd carried, the fear of collapse, lifted all at once, leaving her breathless. "Mr. Finch, I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," Arthur said gently. His tone then hardened steel threading through it. "As for Mr. Cross, he believes money can bend every spine. He's about to learn that some things, grace, loyalty, dignity, decency, are not for sale." At that very hour, in his penthouse of glass and steel, Daniel Cross poured himself a drink with hands that still trembled from exposure. Rage had cooled into something sharper resolve. He would not fight with fists. He would fight with what he knew best: capital. Silent, crushing, invisible. A war had been declared, and the battlefield would not be the restaurant floor, but the shadows of power, where fortunes are made and destroyed. In his penthouse high above Manhattan, Daniel Cross paced like a caged animal. The city lights glittered below, but he barely saw them. His humiliation at the Golden Compass replayed in his mind on a loop. The waitress's calm eyes, the sound of that cursed name, David Kowalski, echoing in front of strangers. Rage had scorched through him at first, but rage alone was useless. Now it hardened, cooling into something far more dangerous: strategy. Daniel picked up the phone and called one of his lieutenants, his voice smooth, composed, lethal. "Sterling Crossbank," he said. "Arthur Finch has an expansion loan in review. 40 million for a London flagship. Whisper my concerns to Davidson quietly. Make sure he understands the risk of backing a man who can't control his own house." He didn't need to threaten directly. In the world of capital, a single word from a shareholder of his stature was enough to poison trust. Doubt would bloom in the boardroom like mold, and within days, Finch's future could collapse into dust. Daniel set the phone down, poured himself another drink. He could almost see it. Arthur ruined his empire, crumbling. Grace Miller blacklisted from every fine establishment in the city. That would be his revenge. Silent, invisible, devastating. But while Daniel plotted in his palace of glass and steel, another kind of war was being waged in the warm glow of a Brooklyn cafe. Grace sat opposite Olivia Hart, her hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug. The cafe was small, crowded with mismatched furniture and the scent of roasted beans. It was the kind of place Daniel Cross would never step foot in. And perhaps that was why Grace felt safe enough to speak. "I don't want to destroy him," she said softly, her voice trembling only at the edges. "That's not why I stepped forward. I just couldn't stand there and let him bully that couple. Not when I knew who he was." Olivia leaned in her notebook, open her pen moving swiftly. She didn't prod, didn't interrogate. She simply let Grace's story flow, each word weaving a fuller picture. Grace spoke of the boy she had known. David Kowalski, 17 years old, hands red from dishwater eyes, burning with restless ambition. She remembered finding him once behind the diner, leaning against the brick wall, a paperback of Dostoevsky in his hands. "Crime and punishment," she said, her eyes distant. The other cooks teased him, called him a grease monkey who thought he was smarter than everyone. I expected him to lash out, but he just looked up and said, "I want to know what makes a man believe he's extraordinary enough to be above the rules." Olivia's pen scratched faster. That single line, that memory, was the thread she had been searching for. It tied the boy, hunched over Russian philosophy in a grimy alley, to the billionaire who had just demanded a booth at any cost, convinced rules were beneath him. Grace shook her head. "I think somewhere along the way, he became exactly what he hated." The cafe hummed softly around them, ordinary people going about their ordinary lives. Yet here, at this small wooden table, a counter-story was taking shape. While Daniel Cross wove webs of capital in the shadows, Olivia Hart was stitching together the truth, the rise, and the fall. The boy and the tyrant, the dishwasher and the billionaire. And when that truth was ready, it would not whisper, it would roar. Thursday morning dawned with the quiet hum of a city already awake. But for Daniel Cross, the day began with an explosion. The headline hit like a thunderclap across digital America. The two faces of Daniel Cross, a split image blazed on screens everywhere. On the left, a black and white photo of a greasy diner in Scranton, Pennsylvania. On the right, a color-saturated portrait of Daniel in his Tom Ford suit, jaw-sharp eyes, cold-framed against a skyline he believed he owned. The article was a masterpiece of contrast. It celebrated his genius, the meteoric rise from nothing and the creation of an empire that reshaped technology. But then, with surgical precision, it pivoted. It told the story of cruelty in a restaurant of an old couple humiliated on their anniversary of a waitress who dared to speak the truth. It laid bare the midnight phone call to Sterling Cross Bank, the whispered maneuver to sabotage Arthur Finch's expansion. And suddenly Daniel's reinvention cracked wide open. By noon, social media was ablaze. Memes spread like wildfire. Daniel's face pasted on a dishwasher's body captioned, "Remember to tip your CEO." Short clips from news commentators repeated Grace Miller's words. Changing your name doesn't change who you are, turned into sound bites stitched into TikTok reels shouted across cable panels. The laughter stung, but worse than laughter was pity. On Wall Street, Ether Dynamics began to bleed. 8% gone in pre-market trading, billions wiped from the board's balance sheets before Daniel had even finished his first cup of coffee. For shareholders who once believed him untouchable, the shine was gone. By midday, the phone call came. It wasn't friendly, it wasn't patient. Daniel said, "Caspian Hale, the chairman of the board." His voice clipped as a knife. "Your conduct is now a liability. Your personal scandal has crossed into corporate blood. We are invoking the morals clause. You will fix this. Not with threats, not with lawyers. You will issue a public apology. You will make amends. You will stop the bleeding. Am I clear?" Daniel sat at his desk, phone pressed to his ear, stunned by the reversal. For decades he had given orders. For decades others had bent to his will. But now the board commanded him, and he could not refuse. After the call ended, Daniel walked to the window of his penthouse. The glass stretched floor to ceiling, the city glittering below like a kingdom of light. But his reflection wasn't that of a king. He saw a boy, 17 years old, fists raw from punching a brick wall behind the corner booth diner in Scranton. A boy with grease on his hands, shame burning his chest, vowing that he would never be dirt again, that he would become someone else, that he would bury David Kowalski forever. But Grace's voice echoed now louder than the city outside, louder than the headlines, louder than the jeering laughter online. Changing your name doesn't change who you are. His hand tightened on the glass. His empire was cracking, and worse, so was the story he'd told himself all his life. For the first time in years, Daniel Cross felt not power, not rage, but fear. Daniel Cross could have disappeared. He could have retreated into his fortress of glass and steel, buried himself beneath lawyers and PR firms, and waited for the storm to pass. That was his pattern. Erase the problem, erase the past. But this time something shifted. The following evening, a different car pulled up to the Golden Compass. Not the gleaming Bentley that once announced his arrival like a trumpet of war. Instead, a plain black sedan slid to the curb, quiet and unremarkable. When Daniel stepped out, there was no entourage, no air of conquest. His shoulders still bore the weight of pride, but the swagger was gone. Inside the room, hushed again. But this time, it was a different silence. No one was shoved aside. No booth was demanded. Daniel walked softly across the marble floor and paused where it had all unraveled days before. Julien Moreau met his eyes, wary but steady. Grace was nowhere to be seen, already off duty. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't beg. He didn't roar. He simply stood acknowledging without words the truth that had been laid bare. A nod. A breath. The faintest sign of surrender. And then, quietly, he left. It was not redemption yet. But it was a start. Weeks later, headlines shifted again. This time not about scandal, but about rebirth. The Cross Foundation for Renewal was launched, its mission clear: to restore the neighborhoods America had forgotten. The first project, Scranton, Pennsylvania, the place Daniel had once clawed to escape. Streets that had crumbled storefronts, long abandoned playgrounds, rusted through, now funded for revival. Jobs, schools, homes, hope. And though his name was carved on the foundation's letterhead, Daniel himself remained silent. No interviews, no speeches, just action. Meanwhile, Grace Miller walked across a stage in cap and gown. Her art degree and hand tuition fully covered, she began to paint with a vision sharpened by everything she had seen. Her canvases captured not the grandeur of skyscrapers, but the dignity of ordinary lives. Tired hands, wrinkled smiles, the resilience of people overlooked. Collectors would later call her work unflinching, honest human. Arthur Finch remained at his post above the Golden Compass, a steady guardian of integrity. To his staff, he became not just an owner, but a compass himself, a reminder that principle could stand, even against power. Daniel and Grace never met again. They didn't need to. Some apologies are spoken louder in deeds than in words. The final image is not of a boardroom or a gala. It is a quiet street in Scranton. Night falls on the corner booth diner, its neon sign flickering the way it always had. And outside on the cracked sidewalk stands Daniel Cross, hands in his pockets, coat collar pulled high, watching through the window. Inside, teenagers in faded uniforms scrub plates and carry trays just as he once did. He does not enter. Not yet. He simply watches, caught between the boy he ran from and the man he is struggling to become. A ghost at the threshold. Our past is not a prison, it's a compass. No fortune, no new name, no tower of glass can erase the truth of where we began. Real strength isn't measured by how high we climb, but by how deeply we remember what it felt like to stand at the bottom. Do you believe a man like Daniel Cross can truly change, or is redemption just another story the powerful tell themselves? Share your thoughts below. And if this story spoke to you, consider subscribing for more tales that reach beyond power and pride into the heart of what makes us human.